You were never really one of us, Odessa hissed, just seconds before Talon slammed me into the floorboards. I tasted blood and cedar. My ears rang, not from the blows, but from the realization that this wasn't just a fight over a house. It was a war for memory, for truth, and for the right to say, I belonged. They thought I'd run. They thought silence meant surrender, but I don't need their apology. I just want the world to hear what really happened. Before we dive in, let me know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. I survived the mountains of Kandahar, but I nearly died on the hardwood floor my father built with his own hands. The house smelled like lilies. Not the fresh kind you'd leave on a lover's porch, but the kind that lined funeral homes, heavy, chemical, pretending to be alive. I sat alone at the kitchen table, my boots still damp from the drizzle outside. My father's house, no, our house, felt foreign now, like someone had repainted my memories in beige. Talon and Odessa had arrived that morning. They'd driven down from Chicago in a rental SUV, like tourists ready to renovate a relic. And now they sat sprawled on the living room couch, sipping his bourbon, the bottle half empty already. Odessa's legs were curled beneath her, one heel dangling, a glint of satisfaction in her tone as she scanned the room. So, this is it? She said, not even to me, just to the air. Guess we'll knock this down and flip it. Has potential. Her words clanged against the hush that had settled in the room. I didn't answer. My fingers tightened around the ceramic mug. I'd spent years thinking blood was sacred, untouchable. But in that moment, watching them casually carve up the last space he and I shared, I didn't see family. I saw opportunists with the Quinn surname. The kitchen clock hammered out each second, heavier than usual. Talon fiddled with his phone while Odessa flipped through mail she had no right touching. The last time we'd all been in the same room was years ago. Maybe Dad's birthday? Even then, they left before the cake was cut. I moved to the counter, poured another cup of coffee, though the caffeine had long stopped doing anything for me. I absorbed their voices, twisting greed into grief, and a sharp weight lodged between my ribs. We sat for dinner later, a quiet kind of warfare. The silverware clicked like distant gunfire. Odessa chewed slowly, her eyes lingering on the family portrait above the mantel, one I wasn't even in. She smirked. Talon reached into his leather bag and pulled out a thin sheaf of paper, unfolding it carefully as if it might bleed. This, he said, sliding it across the table, is the real will. The one Dad wanted. Not that thing you made him sign when he could barely speak. I didn't touch it. Instead, I pushed back my chair, crossed the room, and pulled open the drawer with a steady tug, careful not to let the wood groan. Inside, wrapped in a faded manila envelope, was the official will, drafted, signed, notarized. Harlan Mays, Dad's attorney for over 2 decades, had overseen every word. The seal still pressed proud into the paper, slightly cracked at the edges. I slid it across the counter, keeping my hand atop it like a paperweight. "This is the will," I said, voice steady but brittle. "The only one that holds up." Talon didn't even bother to look. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, mouth curling into that smirk I remembered from every Thanksgiving he never helped clean up after. "You locked the old man in here for the last few months of his life. Who's to say he even knew what he was signing? Could have been thinking he was ordering takeout." The words didn't hit like a joke. They struck like spit. I didn't answer. My hands slid to my sides, grazing the denim of my jeans as if the rough fabric might ground me. He'd called twice in 6 months. Once to ask about the tax forms, once to tell me Odessa didn't want to come for Christmas if Dad was still all tube and no talking. That was the love they gave. Clean, distant, and conveniently timed. The screen door creaked open behind us, followed by the soft scrape of boots on linoleum. I turned to see Merritt Cole standing there, hat in hand. His frame had thickened since retirement, and the gray in his mustache had spread like frost over a windshield. Still, he moved with the deliberate care of a man who once knew what it meant to clear a room with one glance. "Sorry I missed the service," he said, placing a metal thermos on the table. "Traffic was a beast coming in from Rock Hill." I nodded, managing something between gratitude and numbness. "Dad's old-school coffee?" I asked. He tapped the lid twice. "Black as Judgment Day. Just like Arthur liked it." I tried to smile, but my attention slid back to the will. It was ridiculous, really. After all the years of knowing I wasn't the favorite, I still hadn't prepared for this particular punch. I wasn't seeking a medal, just not to be accused of forging the last thing he left behind. I always knew Talon was the one who got the smile. The easy praise, the seat up front, I murmured, not looking at either man, but I didn't think I'd still be proving I wasn't a thief, while the lilies were still alive. Merritt's eyes narrowed. "You think Arthur didn't know what he was doing?" "He asked me to drive him to Harlan's." Twice Talon snorted. "Yeah? He also thought the squirrels in the attic were plotting against him. Don't act like him remembering your name means anything." Merritt glanced toward me. He remembered hers. Talon didn't respond, just watched as Merritt adjusted his coat and turned to leave. At the threshold, he looked back, soft-eyed. "That old man was a pain in the ass, but he was proud of you, Ramsey." He showed me your photo on the base website, called you captain like it meant something bigger than rank. The door clicked shut. I released a breath I hadn't noticed was trapped in my chest. That moment, just one word he'd used, months before he went quiet, had clung to the inside of my ribs like a prayer. Captain, not Ramsey or kid or the stubborn one. Just that single word, full of weight and maybe, for once, respect. Talon watched Merritt's car pull out, then turned to me with a grin like he'd already won something. "He's retired. Don't think for a second he's going to save you when this gets ugly." I didn't answer. I walked past him, the mug Merritt brought warming my palms. I stepped out onto the back porch, sat on the cold steps, and cradled it against my chest like a relic. The chipped rim pressed against my sweater. They came into this house like I was the one who had to pack up and vanish. Like I was the stray, like I was never really a Quinn at all. When the chill finally sank into my bones, I went back inside. My hands searched for something solid, something that hadn't been stolen by their presence. The file drawer screeched when I pulled it open, its metal track rasping like a tired protest. Inside, chaos. Folders that had once been alphabetized, Dad's compulsive handiwork, were now shoved in sideways, mismatched or half open. The paper tabs curled at the edges as if they'd been flipped through roughly, carelessly. And his letters, handwritten ones from decades ago, some he kept even from Mom, were gone. I froze. My fingers hovered above the empty slot where he'd tucked them behind tax returns, private and weathered like old hymns. Out on the porch, Odessa's voice carried through the screen. "I mean, really, what's left in this dump to even save?" She was on her cell, perched sideways on the swing, legs crossed tight in her designer jeans, flicking ash from a cigarette that burned unevenly. The floorboards creak. The windows stick, and even the couch smells like wet leaves. I walked outside slowly, watching her silhouette blur against the soft light of late morning. She didn't flinch when I appeared behind her, just waved a hand absently, still focused on her call. "That house is practically holding itself together out of pity," she chuckled. "And that sofa? Should have been condemned along with the rest of this town?" I didn't speak. Just stepped around her, eyes narrowing as I noticed my laptop propped on the little iron table beside her. Open. She wasn't even subtle. With a sharp tug, I pulled it toward me. Her mouth opened in protest, but I was already scanning the screen. A real estate tab sat open, photo after photo of the house, including the basement, the attic, even the old storm cellar Dad always said was none of the city's damn business. "This is private property," I said, my voice brittle with disbelief. She shrugged, not embarrassed in the least. "We were just doing some homework." You know, in case we end up co-owners, I slammed the laptop shut and went inside. My hands kept quivering until I finally dialed Harlan. The old lawyer's voice crackled with caution. Yes, the will's solid. Notarized, time-stamped, witnessed. But Ramsey, if they bring a claim about mental manipulation or diminished capacity, it could get ugly. Drawn out, my eyes fell on the spot where Dad once kept his boots by the kitchen door. Empty now, just the indentations left behind. "I didn't manipulate him," I muttered, mostly to myself. I bathed him, lifted him to bed when he couldn't stand, fed him when he forgot how to hold a spoon. "Doesn't matter what you did," Harlan replied. "It matters what they can prove or make a judge believe." I hung up and leaned against the fridge, the cool metal soothing against my back. The memory of that day flashed again. Dad had collapsed near the shed, breath shallow, lips tinged blue. Talon had texted, "Keep me posted," and gone back to his client dinner in Milwaukee. I'd called Merritt, who'd arrived in 10 minutes flat. Only person Dad didn't fight when it came to going to the hospital. That man carried Dad's stubbornness like a matching badge. And yet, he'd helped me. No questions asked. The screen door creaked again. Talon walked in, peeling the label off a bottle of soda. "You took care of him, sure. But that's a nurse's job. Doesn't make you the daughter of the year." I clenched my jaw, stomach churning. I was his daughter. "Always was," he smirked. "You were his chore list." Couldn't reply, so the hallway pulled me forward, past the dark bathroom, into the bedroom still carrying a faint trace of Old Spice and cedar. Dust drifted in the angled rays spilling through half-shut blinds. The dresser stood waiting. The family portrait from that beach trip, our one normal moment, was still there. But something was wrong. Leaning closer revealed a crack in the frame. My part had been sliced clean away. 3 people remained in the photo now, smiling, complete. The sight left me unmoored, the air thick as if the house itself wanted me erased. Keys jingled in my hand before the thought even formed. Proof was needed, and Merritt was the only one who might hold it. The old station slouched at the edge of town like a retired warhorse, bricks dulled by decades of storms, flagpole leaning as if tired of standing at attention. The truck rolled into the same gravel patch Dad once favored for his civic chats with Merritt. Engine ticked to silence. The place hadn't changed. Same hand-painted sheriff's sign flaking, same dent in the front step where a childhood fall left a scar, same silence wrapped in time. The door grated open under my hand. Inside, the scent of stale coffee mingled with gun oil, and something fainter, maybe dust and regret. Merritt sat at his old desk, surrounded by teetering stacks of fishing catalogs and forgotten paperwork. He glanced up with those familiar blue eyes, bleached softer with age. "You look like hell," he said, gesturing toward the empty chair. "Sit." "I didn't come here to be flattered." "You didn't come here to be comforted either." I sat. My knees creaked as I sank into the cracked leather. He rummaged behind him in the desk drawer and returned with a leather-bound notebook wrapped in a rubber band. "Your father gave me this last spring," he said, laying it gently between us. Said, "If I start slipping, you make sure she gets it." I didn't ask questions. The moment I touched it, my stomach twisted. Dad's handwriting filled the cover page, slanted, neat, almost obsessive in its order. I peeled back the first few sheets, entries, dozens of them, all referencing Talon. $500, March rent, again. $1,100, Odessa's medical. Didn't ask. $4,200, investment in new app idea. Every line was a brick in the invisible house Talon had been living in, one built with my father's dwindling savings. 10 years, quiet withdrawals, all while Talon claimed to be building something big. I flipped forward to the last entry, penned just weeks before Dad's collapse. No more left to give. My throat tightened. He never told me, I said, voice taut. Shame's a funny thing, Merritt murmured. He kept thinking he could fix it. Or maybe he didn't want you to think less of your brother, or him. I stared at the ink until the words bled together. The room was too quiet. You should have given this to me earlier. I thought it wasn't mine to give. He stood, bones creaking like old floorboards. But maybe it was never about me making that call. Maybe it's about what you do now. I drove back, clutching the notebook to my chest like armor. The sun had dipped low, cutting through the windshield in slanted orange beams. I didn't stop at red lights. I barely noticed the turns. By the time I parked outside the house, I'd already decided. Inside, I scanned the entire notebook, file by file. I created folders on a USB drive, labeled meticulously: transfers, loans, forgiveness records. Then I printed each page, slid them into plastic sleeves, and lined them up on the dining table like forensic evidence. I was no longer grieving. I was preparing for trial, one they didn't even know had begun. That night, while reheating the untouched casserole Merritt had dropped off last week, my email pinged. From Emery Jennings. Subject R.E., Talon Quinn body, Ramsey, heads up, ran his name. It's bad. Defaulted loans, at least one foreclosure. Maxed out every card. If I had to guess, he's hunting for a quick cash out. Be careful. I didn't have time to respond. Footsteps padded down the hallway, measured, confident, like he owned the floorboards. Talon emerged from Dad's study, holding a loose sheet of paper in his hand. Not the will. I knew its texture, its embossed gold seal, the fold creases from years of storage. This was different. Letter-sized, plain, freshly printed. His fingers curled around the edges just as I stepped into view. We locked eyes. His expression didn't change, but his hand twitched. He folded the sheet once, sharply, and tucked it into his back pocket. Then, without a word, he brushed past me, his cologne trailing something sharp and synthetic. I waited until he was gone before stepping into the study. The drawer where Dad kept his private files sat ajar, and the faint outline of a document had been disturbed on the desk's surface. But whatever he took, it wasn't there now. And suddenly, I wasn't sure what had vanished, just a paper, or the last illusion that he'd leave peacefully. The floorboards groaned down the hall. A duffel zipper rasped open, quick and nervous. I followed the sound, every step tightening my chest. I caught Talon just as he was stuffing the folded paper into his duffel. He looked up like a raccoon caught in the pantry, guilty but already defiant. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice flat. Not trembling, not soft, just finished. His scoff was sharp and short. "What do I want?" "Ramsey, I've spent my whole life cleaning up after Dad's fantasy of you in a uniform. You know what he called you at the VFW last summer? My soldier girl. Said you'd bled for the country, that you'd earned your place at the table." He snorted. "You were his badge of virtue. His second chance. Me? I was just the kid who stayed." "No, Talon," I said, stepping closer. "You were the one who cashed his checks and ghosted when he needed you most." The paper in his hand crinkled. Odessa's heels clicked on the hardwood as she entered, holding a manila envelope like it was a bomb she couldn't wait to detonate. "We've already drafted the paperwork," she said coolly. "We refinanced the house." "Split the cash. Everyone walks away clean." She placed the folder on the table, flipping it open. "All it needs is your signature." I stared at the loan agreement. It was already pre-filled, right down to my Social Security number. My jaw tightened. "No," I said. Talon's hands pounded the table so hard the envelope jumped. "You want to play soldier? Fine. But don't think that uniform makes you untouchable." He leaned in. I'll tell the family you locked Dad in here. That you forced him to sign things when he couldn't remember his own name. Want to see how long your honor survives that?" I didn't blink. Instead, I stepped back and pulled out my phone. "Let's call Merritt." 30 minutes later, Merritt arrived, his old cruiser parking with a groan outside. He stepped in, took one long look at Talon's flushed face and Odessa's forced smile, and said nothing for a moment. Just set his thermos on the table and looked at me. "They threatening you?" "Not in so many words," I said, "but they want the house." Today, Merritt glanced at the papers. "You don't have to sign anything, not without counsel." "She forged the will," Talon cut in. "That's the real issue." "You're accusing her of a felony?" Merritt asked. "Let's say undue influence," Odessa chimed, her tone dipped in fake civility. Merritt's shoulders stiffened. "Unless there's a court order or signs of immediate danger, this is a civil issue. I'm not here to referee inheritance squabbles, but," he turned to me, "you keep your head on straight, Ramsey. They're sweating. That's why they're loud." After they left the room, Merritt lingered, voice low. "They're hoping to scare you into a mistake." "Don't give them one." I nodded, jaw aching from how long I'd been grinding my teeth. After Merritt left, I went to the back room where the safe sat tucked behind Dad's old coats. I twisted the combination and pulled the heavy door open. Inside, next to the military discharge papers and old tax returns, was a yellowed envelope labeled in my father's handwriting, "In case I forget who I was." My fingers shook as I slid the letter out. The ink was faded, the cursive unsteady. "Ramsey, if you're reading this, I probably don't know you anymore. That's the cruel part. But if I still could, I'd tell you this. You made me proud, not because of medals or war stories or sacrifice, but because when the house was falling apart, you stayed, love Dad. No date, no legal heft." But every word hit me like a hammer. I folded the page, pressed it to my chest, then placed it back where I found it, right beside the flag I once handed to a grieving widow in West Virginia, the one who said, "He was all I had left." Later that evening, I stood in the hallway adjusting the thermostat when I heard something off. A click, metal on metal. I crept down the kitchen, barefoot, heart thudding in my ears. At the back door, I reached for the handle and turned. It stuck. Odd. I'd unlocked it earlier that morning. I grabbed my key ring, slid the spare into the lock, and it didn't turn. A chill ran up my spine. The deadbolt had been changed. I pressed my shoulder against the back door, nudged it open an inch, and immediately stopped. The frame was tight, not from humidity or swollen wood. Someone had tampered with the lock. The metal felt too smooth, freshly scraped, as if a new key had been tested, maybe even fitted. I checked the knob again. The deadbolt didn't catch the way it used to. My father always said a door tells you when it's been violated. You just have to listen to the silence it leaves behind. Back inside, I double-latched the front and unplugged the garage opener from the wall. My boots stayed on. I didn't bother with pajamas. If they were coming, they weren't going to wait for a polite hour. Night blanketed the sky, dragging clouds over the moon. The power blinked twice before the house sank into a sudden, unnatural hush, the kind that eats sound. I stood still, heartbeat ticking like a grenade under my ribs. A muffled scuff, outside near the shed. Then a faint scent drifted through the cracked window above the sink. Not smoke from a chimney or a fireplace. Number. This was sharper. The tang of off-brand cigarettes, lit by hands that didn't belong here. I reached for the drawer, pulled out the old Army-issue flashlight I kept beside the batteries, and switched it to red mode. Low light, no glare. I moved through the kitchen like I was back in Kabul. Measured steps. Breath kept shallow. The first shadow appeared by the porch swing, hooded, broad shoulders. He didn't glance toward the window, too confident. A second figure trailed behind him, thinner but quicker. They moved like they'd rehearsed this. My hand found the nearest object with weight, the cast iron skillet. I held it low, body angled behind the doorframe. The screen rasped. Hinges gave them away. The door opened without resistance. My breath caught sharp in my chest. The tall one entered first. The smaller one followed, stepping light. No words between them, just nods. Synchronization. Professionals, or at least practiced. When the tall one reached for the hallway, I struck. The skillet collided with his forearm. He cursed, but not in surprise, in anger. The second man lunged at me. I ducked, twisted under his grasp, slammed an elbow into his ribs. He wheezed, stumbled back, and I drove my knee up, fast and high. We wrestled near the dining table. Chairs screeched. One toppled. I caught a glimpse of his mask, cheap black fabric stitched down the center. The tall one charged again, this time with a wrench pulled from his waistband. I pivoted, grabbed his arm, and twisted. Something tore. He screamed, a raw, guttural noise, and dropped the wrench. Blood splattered the table edge. I didn't stop to identify. I kicked the back of his knee, dropped him, and shoved both bodies toward the door in a single desperate burst. One scrambled out. The other crawled after him, cursing under his breath. I bolted the door behind them, shoved the fridge in front of it, and collapsed against the floor. My lungs burned. My hands quivered, not from fear, but from restraint. I could have broken his wrist if I wanted to. Instead, I reached for the edge of the curtain and peeked through. They were gone. Only the yard remained, silent, indifferent. I stood slowly, wiped blood from the corner of my mouth with the back of my hand, and scanned the floor. Near the table leg, a scrap of torn fabric glistened. I picked it up, still warm, soaked. A patch of maroon cotton, frayed at the edge. Not uniform material, civilian. I dropped it into a Ziploc and headed for the study. Dad's backup system, an old trail cam pointed at the back porch, had recorded it all. I pulled the memory card, slotted it into the reader, and watched the grainy footage. Frame by frame, I studied their escape. One man limped, favoring his right leg. The other clutched his left forearm, blood soaking through his sleeve. The camera didn't show faces, but it caught enough. That gait, the height, the way the taller man turned, just slightly, as if favoring a shoulder that had been dislocated once before. My stomach sank. Talon had a shoulder injury years ago. Baseball. I shut the laptop. I didn't pack much. Flashlight, USB drive, letters, Dad's old pistol from the top closet shelf. I didn't call Merritt, didn't leave a note. I was gone before the porch light came back on, and I didn't look back. The truck ate up the miles of back road, headlights slicing through pine and gravel until the town lights thinned into nothing. The motel sign flickered like it couldn't decide if it still wanted to stay open. Vacancy blinked in a weak red pulse. Half of the letters burned out. I pulled the truck into the gravel lot, parked between two sedans coated in dust, and killed the engine. I didn't sit there long. The adrenaline hadn't worn off, but the trembling had, replaced by something heavier. Something close to grief, but tighter, more metallic. My hands moved on their own as I grabbed the essentials from the passenger seat. My duffel, the USB, the letter from Dad, and the gun wrapped in a flannel shirt. Inside the lobby, the clerk barely looked up from his tablet. Late 20s, earbuds in, shirt with a cigarette burn near the hem. Perfect. "I need a room," I said. He slid the registration form across the counter without a word. I paused, then signed a name that hadn't been mine since high school. Marlene Quinn. Room 16 carried the scent of bleach and stale cigarettes. The bedspread was thin, patterned in faded maroon diamonds. I set the duffel down, checked the window locks, drew the curtains tight, and propped a chair under the doorknob. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the stucco ceiling, speckled like old oatmeal. I'd fought through blackouts in the desert, dug shrapnel out of my own leg, held the hands of soldiers who wouldn't make it to sunrise. But none of that taught me how to become a fugitive in my father's country home. I dozed fitfully, half aware, muscles locked, the pistol resting beneath the pillow like a curse. By dawn, I'd checked my messages. Nothing urgent. Then at 7:04 a.m., Odessa's number lit the screen. Running suits you. Always did. The words glowed bright against the silence. No follow-up, no emojis, just a slap in the face, casual as breath. They knew where I was. I circled the room 3 times before opening the blinds a sliver. No movement outside, no unfamiliar cars, no shadow against the curtain. But paranoia isn't always wrong. It's just early. An hour later, a soft knock tapped the door. My hand went to the pistol. Ramsey. The voice was muffled, low. It's Merritt. I opened the door halfway, 1 foot behind the frame. His face was tired, eyes red like he'd been chewing gravel all night. I had a hunch, he said. Figured if I were you, I'd go to a place with no HOA and no memory. He held up a coffee. Peace offering. I let him in. He sat at the table beneath the buzzing ceiling light. No questions right away. Just silence and the slow hiss of the radiator struggling to function. They're watching, I finally said. Maybe not officially. Maybe not with drones. But Odessa texted me like she already checked me in. Merritt rubbed the bridge of his nose. They're cocky, which means they're desperate. That's when people slip up. Don't let it rattle you. I showed him the photo of the bloodied cloth, then opened the laptop and clicked through the grainy footage again. Frame by frame, the shadowed figure clutching his arm, the limp, the familiar tilt of the shoulders. Merritt didn't deny it. They've crossed a line, I said. You're not wrong, he replied, but they're not done. And you being off the grid only makes them louder. Let them yell. Noise is easy to track. I nodded, unsure whether that meant stay or move again. As he stood to leave, his hand lingered on the doorknob. You ever hear the story of the possum and the firecracker? He asked. No. Possum finds a firecracker. Doesn't know what it is. Sits on it to keep it warm. When it blows, it's shocked. Figures the world betrayed it. But the truth is, it hugged the fuse the whole time. What's the point? Don't sit too long on what's already lit. He left before I could argue. I spent the rest of the morning calling Emery from a burner I picked up at a gas station near the freeway. Her voice cracked with static. You were right to leave. Talon's accounts are being frozen across 3 states. I ran a skip trace. He's bounced checks from Indiana to Illinois. The guy's up to his ears. Why would someone that broke waste time chasing me for a house he wants to sell? Because the bank won't wait. If he can't flip something fast, they'll dig into everything, including what your dad gave him off books. And if you're in the way, I'm not. That's what worries me. I hung up. Outside, the light had dimmed behind a curtain of storm clouds. Rain tapped softly against the air conditioner. At 3:12 p.m., I heard a gentle rustle at the base of the door. Not a knock, not mail, just a slide. I walked over. A plain manila envelope rested against the carpet. No markings. I crouched, peeled the flap open, and pulled out a single photo. It was me, slumped in the motel chair at 2 a.m., eyes closed, mouth slightly open, blanket slipping from one shoulder. The angle had come from outside the window, and whoever took it never knocked. I shoved the photo back into the envelope and walked out without a bag. Only the folders came with me. By the time I pulled into Merritt's driveway, the one with the rusted smoker on the porch and wind chimes made from shotgun shells, he was already at the door, opening it before I could knock, like he'd been waiting. I've got everything, I said, handing over the binder. Dates, transfers, scans of the letter, the bank statements, even the envelope. He flipped through the pages, then disappeared into the back office without a word. When he returned, he was holding a portable scanner and a fresh pack of printer paper. These stay with me, he said. Paper can't crash. If they touch your daddy's shop, you call me before you do anything stupid. I sat at his kitchen table, watching his knuckles tighten as he fed each page into the machine. The sound of the scanner was slow, mechanical, almost calming. For a moment, I thought maybe we'd outrun the worst of it. But then my phone buzzed. A notification from Facebook. Odessa Quinn posted a video, the house Dad left behind, now occupied by someone who abandoned him. My gut twisted. The thumbnail showed the porch, Dad's porch, painted in the gold light of late afternoon, captured from the street like a tabloid ambush, my truck in the driveway. No caption about grief or legacy, just a story spun for clicks. I could already imagine the rest of the comments. I clicked out of it. Let the rage settle behind my ribs like a slow bruise. People in this town remembered me from pep rallies and gas station coffee. But memory's a fickle thing when it's spoon-fed gossip. Merritt didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Back at the cafe by the lake, Dad's old haunt where he used to argue with strangers about baseball stats, I met Emery. She was already nursing an iced tea, tapping at her laptop with one hand. I slid into the booth across from her and opened my mouth to explain, but she just nodded like she'd read the silence already. "They want you angry," she said. "They want me erased." She angled the screen toward me. Good news first. It was a scan of Dad's medical chart from the week he signed the will. Next to it, Emery had placed a screenshot of the handwritten letter, looping cursive, deliberate, matching strokes. Identical handwriting. Identical date. "It holds up?" I asked. "Enough for a judge to squint twice at anything they throw your way." I took a breath and watched a couple toss breadcrumbs to ducks along the shoreline. Everything here moved slower, like time wanted to be forgiven for rushing. "What else?" Emery hesitated, then reached for her bag and pulled out a flash drive. "Merritt sent me this last night. He found it while sorting through his external hard drives." She clicked the file open. A shaky video played. Dad in the backyard kneeling beside Daisy, his old hound with lungs like paper. He was rubbing her belly, murmuring about raccoons in the shed and how the tomatoes weren't ripening right. His voice was clear, his posture firm. The timestamp blinked. 2 days after the will was signed. My throat closed. "He wasn't confused," I whispered. "No," Emery said. "He was being quiet." Big difference. We sat like that for a while. She didn't rush me. I didn't try to explain the years of waiting to be heard. Finally, I spoke. "I used to think I just needed someone to listen to me," I said. "Now? I don't care if they listen. I want the truth to speak loud enough that it doesn't need me." She reached across the table and squeezed my wrist. Then she pulled her laptop closer, fingers flying across the trackpad. "This is the part where it gets interesting." She opened a business registry site and entered a name, Odessa M. Quinn. One result came up, filed in Illinois. Oak and Steel Realty, LLC, registered 2 days before my father died. "Real estate brokerage," Emery said. She didn't just want to sell the house. She was planning to flip it before he was cold. My temples pulsed. "You think Talon knows?" "Hard to say," she replied, "but someone does. And they're not subtle." A-ping, new email, no subject, no signature, just a .move file attached. I clicked it open. The angle was low, grainy footage from behind the hallway coat rack. The day Talon stormed the house. His voice, slurred with anger, echoed through the speakers. "Just sign it. If you're dead tomorrow, I'll sign it for you." I hit pause, and I didn't move. The next time his words played, they weren't on my laptop screen. They were in the courtroom speakers, grainy but clear enough to make the clerk flinch. The conference room reeked of recycled air and burnt coffee, one of those neutral spaces rented by the court for preliminary mediations. Bland carpet, laminated table, microphones that blinked red but captured nothing useful. I sat across from Talon and Odessa, a full carafe of untouched water between us, like a peace offering no one wanted. Their lawyer, a young man with too much gel and too little conviction, cleared his throat. "We're proposing a settlement," he began, spreading out a folder with manicured precision. My clients are prepared to relinquish a percentage of the estate's liquid assets in exchange for full property rights. That includes the house, the workshop, and adjacent lots. My jaw stayed clenched. My fingers stiffened. I watched the condensation gather on my glass and drip onto the coaster like a slow leak in a sinking boat. "I'm not interested in slicing up a lie," I said. "We moved to a formal hearing. And I want the transcript made public." The mediator, a tired woman in a taupe blazer, raised her brows but said nothing. The lawyer adjusted his tie, glancing at Talon like he hoped he'd jump in and save him. Talon did. "Of course she wants it public," he snapped. "She always needed a damn audience." He leaned forward, eyes gleaming with that familiar superiority I remembered from childhood. The look he used when he used to steal answers off my tests and still call me stupid. The mediator clicked her pen. "Mr. Quinn, you authorized a property valuation and engaged with a real estate firm 2 days before your father's death. Can you explain the timing?" Talon didn't even blink, because I knew what he was about to do. The old man had gone soft. He was going to pull something insane, like leaving it all to her. Not even my name. I kept my voice steady. "Did you visit him in his final month?" Dead quiet. "Did you wipe his mouth when he couldn't chew? Did you change the bed sheets when his meds made him sweat through 3 layers of cotton?" Still nothing. "I'm not a nurse," he spat suddenly. "I'm not someone who waits around with soup and a bedtime story. I'm the one who kept this family fed while you ran off to play soldier." I saw the lawyer flinch. So did the mediator. "I didn't run," I said, eyes locked on his. "I left, because staying meant sinking with you." Odessa scoffed, whispering something to the lawyer, probably about my tone, or my boots, or the fact I still carried myself like I belonged to a world where rank was earned. "You were always jealous of that," I added. Talon's smirk dropped. "Dad called me captain once," I said. "You remember that? When he couldn't lift his arm but still tried to salute me from the recliner? He didn't do that for you. Not even when you begged," he lunged forward then, palms slapping the table. "You were a decoration. He put you on the damn mantle because you were the daughter who didn't screw up visibly. Meanwhile, I was here, paying bills, fixing pipes, keeping this whole place from crumbling." "You weren't fixing anything," I said. "You were draining him." Emery passed me a folder silently. I slid it across the table toward the mediator. Bank transfers. Over 10 years. Regular withdrawals labeled as rent, car repairs, business investments. None of it taxed. All of it from Dad's retirement fund. The air pressed in. Even the air conditioner seemed to fall mute. Odessa crossed her arms, lips pressed into a line. But when the mediator turned to her and said, "Can you speak to the LLC registered in your name and the offshore account connected to it?" she broke. I don't know anything about that," she stammered. "That wasn't mine. I signed some documents Talon gave me." "You signed a purchase license for a property management shell corporation," Emery interjected, "filed 2 days before Arthur Quinn's death." I don't remember." "You remember enough to lie," I said. Talon barked a laugh. "You think you've won something, don't you? I think you've already lost." The mediator closed her folder and looked toward the recording clerk. "The court will pause this mediation pending a review of the submitted financial evidence and video materials. A hearing will be scheduled regarding potential psychological coercion and unlawful transfer of assets." My chair scraped as I stood. Behind me, Talon hissed, "You're just a damn reservist." I'm the real son. I didn't look back. I carried that hiss with me all the way to the parking lot. By the time the courthouse steps gave way to asphalt and my tires rolled over the gravel back home, it still clung to me like smoke. The branches of the magnolia brushed against the window as I pulled in, their fingertips testing for cracks. Odessa's car was gone. Not a note, Not a plate of her half-eaten fruit, just the hollow quiet of a house that had been used up and left behind. I stepped inside. The musty air pressed heavy against the walls. On the dining table sat a folder with 2 clipped pages, an official-looking loan document bearing my name, my forged signature, and a stamp from a bank I'd never set foot in. They'd gone that far. I scanned the bottom corner. Backdated. 3 days before the altercation. Their plan had started long before the night someone tried to drag me off my own porch in the dark. I stayed on my feet, photographing each page, uploaded them to the secure drive, and forwarded everything. Documents, the clip from the motel, Talon's threat caught on Merritt's shop recorder, to the court clerk's email. I added a note in plain language, evidence of financial fraud, forged consent, and verbal threat regarding incapacitation of a legal heir. Outside, cicadas screamed from the branches. I slid into my truck and drove to the cemetery. The gravel path snaked between mossy headstones, soft earth still fresh over my father's plot. I kneeled beside it, a gust brushing loose strands of hair across my cheek. From my jacket pocket, I pulled the old journal he used to write in when his hand still had strength. The pages still smelled faintly of varnish and graphite. I set it gently atop the grave. "I'm sorry I once thought about selling this place," I whispered. "Sorry I thought running away would fix what broke between us." A wind picked up. It didn't feel like forgiveness, but it didn't feel like blame either. I get it now. It was never about the lumber. It was about legacy, and not the kind Talon thinks he deserves. Back in the truck, my phone buzzed. Emery. "They've accepted the filing," he said before I even said hello. "The bank's signatures don't match your military records." And Odessa's being served a no-fly order. Her accounts just froze. No cheer rose in me, not even a smile. I just stared out at the pine trees lining the road and muttered, "Good." At a red light, I opened my inbox. One by one, I added every relative still alive to a new email thread. Cousins, aunts, second uncles, those who stayed quiet during the inheritance gossip, and those who whispered behind their coffee cups. I attached 4 files: my father's last letter, the video of him calling for the dog by name, the audio of Talon's threat, and a spreadsheet labeled Financial Transfers, 2010 to 2024. In the message body, I didn't write a plea. I didn't write an accusation. I typed, "I don't need anyone's apology. Just don't speak my father's name unless you knew who he really was." No signature. I hit send at a stop sign between 2 fields of brittle corn stalks. The sun was starting to drop below the trees, casting long shadows like the stretched hands of everything I used to bury. That night, I unlocked the doors of the old wood shop. The dust hadn't settled from my absence. It just waited. I flipped the light switch and stood there, breathing in the scent of cedar and ash. The old lathe sat quiet but solid. The bench still bore the mark of my father's chisel. I didn't clean anything. I didn't scrub the past. I just hung a hand-painted sign over the doorway. Veteran Wood Recovery Program. Free entry, no judgment. The next morning, as the first cicadas stirred, a man limped through the gate. He wore a torn jacket, one pant leg pinned up above the knee. His eyes scanned the space slowly. He didn't speak, just walked to the nearest table and ran his fingers over the grain of a half-carved beam. His grip quivered. I offered him a stool. "We can start with a broken board," I said, nodding toward the raw pile near the saw. "Doesn't mean it can't hold weight." While he settled into the workbench, I let the sawdust do its work on me, too. That same morning, across town, the courthouse filled up, reporters crowding the steps, microphones snapping toward anyone with a folder or a tie. I wasn't there to see it. I stayed with the wood, and with the man who needed the chair more than I needed a verdict. Instead, I crouched behind a pile of repurposed furniture, scanning rows of uneven legs and rusty bolts. I needed a matching spindle leg, birch or maple, maybe walnut, for the therapy chair I promised the Marine vet with the fused spine. I'd taken apart 3 tables so far. Nothing matched. In the back of the shop, the radio murmured static and old blues. A freight train groaned in the distance, barely audible behind the hum of a belt sander I hadn't switched off all the way. I didn't hear the truck pull in, but I knew the knock. 3 slow taps, 1 pause, then the last 2 in quick rhythm. Merritt always knocked like that, like he was spelling a name no one remembered anymore. He ducked his head under the door frame, holding a manila envelope the size of a legal pad. It looked too formal for him. He usually folded paperwork in half and stuffed it in his back pocket next to the old steel flask he never used. "Figured I'd find you elbow deep in sawdust," he said, brushing past a crate of scrap beams. "Try splinter deep," I muttered, nudging a drawer shut with my boot. "You look like you've been in court." He didn't answer right away, just handed me the envelope. "This one's official." Signed, sealed, entered into the county record. I took it with both hands. The flap wasn't sealed. I could have looked. I didn't. He leaned against the old cabinet I'd been meaning to fix. They ruled it valid. Your dad's handwriting, video proof, medical records, financial logs, all of it held up. Not even a hesitation gratitude never made it past my lips. He watched me for a moment. Odessa tried to fake composure on the courthouse steps. Smiled like a politician. Then her lawyer walked out on her mid-interview. Something about ethics violations. My hand stayed steady, oddly enough. "And Talon?" I asked, knowing the answer already. 10-year restriction from managing finances. Court found intent to defraud, coerce, and conceal assets. He didn't say a word, not a single damn syllable. Merritt's voice dipped. "You should have seen the judge's face when that video played." I didn't want to see it. I could imagine the grainy footage, Talon's slurred voice, his venom when he thought no one was recording. Instead, I pulled out the stool I'd been sanding for the vet's wife. One leg wobbled, still needed bracing. Merritt stepped closer, tapped the envelope with 2 fingers. "Arthur told me once, before he got sick, he said, if she comes back without needing to hear, she was right. That's how I'll know I did my job as a father." I swallowed the air between us. It went down dry, stuck somewhere between ribs and memory. He tipped his hat and turned for the door. "I'll leave you to it." The door swung closed behind him with a soft creak. I stood still until I couldn't hear his tires crunching the gravel anymore. Then I carried the envelope to the back workbench. The overhead light buzzed faintly. I slid the judgment file onto the wood grain, beside a cracked ruler and half a jar of varnish. For a second, I just stared at the label, Ramsey Coltrane versus Talon Coltrane. Probate decision. I left it folded. No tears, no laughter, no sighs, no gestures. I just placed it in the second drawer beneath my father's old toolbox, the same drawer he used to keep scraps of sandpaper and those stubby pencils too short to write with. It belonged there more than anywhere else. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the chimes Odessa once called clutter. The chair still needed a leg. The vet was coming back Tuesday. He liked it when I played Hank Williams while we worked. I flipped off the sander, pulled the next broken table from the pile, and started again. By the time I opened the shop the next morning, another vet was waiting. Mr. Lyle had rolled in early, his wheelchair angled toward the south-facing window, where the light caught every swirl in the grain. The rays filtered through just enough to make the dust look like it floated with intention. He didn't speak when I greeted him, just offered a nod and rested his hand on the armrest, thumb tapping a nervous rhythm. I recognized the pulse of it, like shell bursts counting down in the belly. We worked in silence at first. I showed him how to square the board edges, how to clamp them tight before glue set in. His hands trembled around the mallet. Every knock sent his shoulders flinching. He murmured, "It sounds too much like Baghdad in 07. I didn't answer, just reached into the side drawer, pulled out the pair of sound-dampening headphones I'd used at the range, placed them gently in front of him. He looked at them for a second, then looked at me. Something shifted behind his eyes, like recognition, not of me, but of a kind of safety. That was enough. Later, when he rolled toward the back bench, I returned to the front wall. There was a photo of my father curled at the corners, faded in the middle. Not the framed one from the living room. No smile, no formal pose. Just him in his old flannel, hands on his hips, squinting at a crooked birdhouse like it had cursed at him. I chose not to hang it in the center. I tacked it just above the sawdust bin, where the light fell slanted in the late afternoons, where he used to stand and mutter about the integrity of clean edges. That was his spot. Now it was mine. The bell above the door chimed. A woman stepped in, her son holding her pinky finger loosely. Her wedding ring was still on the chain around her neck. She glanced around the shop like it might disappear if she blinked. "I heard you teach kids, too," she asked, voice unsure but not hesitant. "Depends on the kid," I said. Her son stepped forward, probably 9 or 10, with untied sneakers and a front tooth coming in crooked. "Mom says you make the strongest chairs in town." Even stronger than my gym teacher? A laugh caught in my throat but never came. "I try not to make them too strong," I told him. "Otherwise, no one can move them when they're wrong." He grinned. "Can we make a bookshelf? For Dad's medals?" His mom's eyes filled too fast for her to hide it, but she blinked them dry with practiced ease. I nodded toward the back. "I've got maple and some spare brass pegs. We started next Monday." By noon, Mr. Lyle had sanded the armrests smooth. He stayed longer than usual. Said the quiet didn't feel so sharp anymore. When the last customer left, I locked the front door and swept the floor like my father used to. Slow, deliberate passes, as if the act itself kept things in place. Outside, dusk melted the lines between buildings and sky. I sat on the back stoop with my coffee and the notebook that had started it all. My father's handwriting faded where the ink had sunk into damp pages. Some words were barely legible now, others etched so deep I could trace them with a fingertip. The last line read, "If she ever sees this, tell her I didn't fix the desk because it didn't matter. It was hers to finish." I pulled the pen from behind my ear and wrote under it, "I'm still working on the table. You probably wouldn't like it, but I think you'd sit at it anyway." No thunder, no ache, only stillness. Like the house finally stopped holding its breath. The porch light flickered on automatically. The town buzzed in the distance. Soft hums, not threats. Inside, someone had placed a sticky note on the counter. "We need more clamps." And glue. "And that music you played yesterday," I peeled it off, stuck it in the drawer beside the verdict and my father's pocket knife. And I realized no one said my name out loud today, but 3 different people knew who I was. Not because of the uniform, not because of the lawsuit, because I stayed. Sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes seeing yourself through a stranger's eyes is enough to keep going. I used to think closure came from apologies, or justice, or someone finally saying, "You were right." But now I know it often comes in quieter forms: a small shop, a stranger's trust, the decision to stay even when walking away would be easier. What about you? Have you ever found peace in a place you once tried to leave behind? If this story spoke to something in you, I hope you'll subscribe. There are more voices to hear, more truths to reclaim, and maybe, somewhere along the way, a little healing for us both.